Technically, it's relatively the same, apart from the fact that it's indoor. So there's obviously challenges with reflective sound, and especially in the low end. But I think the L-ISA system sort of takes away a lot of those problems that we've found anyway, haven't we, Lance? You don't get that big build-up in the centre. Spatially, everything sort of is laid out a lot better, and rigging-wise, it was pretty similar really. It sort of had the whole surround thing, and we had the same amount of frontal hangs, although we didn't quite get the width that we had in New York. We still had a really nice soundscape to work with.
Outside, it's easy to say, oh, everything is crisp and clean and clear because you don't have the reflections. I noticed with this, in this room, even with the reflections and the reverberation in that, there's still a really nice clarity to things, elements of the mix. It's easy to pick things out. You know, I've been in rooms where that's difficult, even with the best systems. Even when we're at our absolute best, that can be difficult in some places. I think this lends itself to, this definitely aids in clarity in a situation like that.
Yeah, that's probably its finest point really, is clarity and perceived volume. You don't have to, it doesn't, it's 94 dB and it feels like it's 100. The focus system, which is the 3 K2 hangs in the centre, pretty much exactly the same. They were 12 K2. In the Royal Albert Hall, we've got 12 K2 with 3 Cara underneath to deal with the very front fill, and then the same amount of elements for the extensions for the Cara. KS28's flowing behind the K2, which works really well, and some arcs for front fill, and then we decided to use Siva for the surround sound, which we've really enjoyed. They're 140 degrees horizontal, so they're quite wide, and they're very efficient. So it was kind of the perfect box, and they sound really good.
Quite loud. They're quite loud too.
Yeah, no, they certainly are.
In such a skinny little package, they're quite loud.
In the Royal Albert Hall, we actually had to use X12s as a sort of a kind of a reverse delay in a way, because they were in front of the Siva to deal with the people that were sitting underneath the circle, because they were shaded by the Siva because they're so high.
The coverage was a little bit more challenging here because of the multi levels of the hall, which is one of the reasons why we have both types of speakers, and the Sivas are farther up.
10 Sivas around the gallery proscenium arches. They look like a proscenium arch, yeah. And 10 X12s on the circle railing that deal with the nearer.
I've been working with the band for 6 years. It wasn't so much me convincing them to go this direction. They always have been very cinematic and very ambient with their music. So it was just kind of a natural progression. They were always looking to do something new, something different, and kind of had an idea of doing a surround sound concert. It's been floating around for quite a while. I had seen the L-Acoustics L-ISA system, and it just spiraled upward, and they decided we're going to try to do this in our concert. I didn't play them surround mixes. What I did was I gave the system a try and did a little bit of mixing with Alt-J music, and then brought them in to listen to it and discuss it. And when they heard that, and when they heard some of the effects that we could do with moving things around in a 360 sound field, they were just excited. Pre-production was a lot of mixing in the studio at Westlake, and also a little bit at Highgate in London, Westlake in Los Angeles, Highgate in London, and even some on the road. Basically just finding bits and pieces and good elements from the current show and placing them in the front field, which is 7 arrays, and then also in the surround. It was kind of a long process, a little bit at a time, and when we put the full system together, that was the final real mix, was actually listening to it in the the stadium or here today at Royal Albert Hall, listening to where the kind of proposed placement and the ideas that we were shooting for, just listening to them in the real world. They have a few little sound effects from their records. The things that are moving that work brilliantly are things like there's a police siren, and it's kind of moving around the room. The same thing with a helicopter. There's a helicopter that flies around. There's one song that opens with a heartbeat, beeping kind of sound. It's called Hunger of the Pine. That moves around the room at the beginning. There are other things that go one way and go another way, just little sound effects. Beyond that, there are things that just fill up the surround. Things like there's a choir. It's amazing to hear the choir coming from everywhere with the band in front of, right in front of you, and you're just surrounded by sound at that point. It's really cool. I would say that we work really closely on the mix anyway, but with this he has to work harder.
I guess the first thing is really establishing what your limitations are in the venue that you've decided, or the band's decided to use the system in. Although some people might think that it's quite limiting, it's proven to be actually quite simple. It's just getting over those first hurdles of where and how you're going to install the system. And then from there, it's just deciding where everything's going to go, and then handing it over to Lance and putting it into the soundscape and really starting to put the objects in the soundscape, really. In terms of getting the system up and tuning it and all that sort of side of things, it's relatively simple.
Here at Royal Albert Hall, everything is programmed. Everything is a snapshot. So I either have to hit the snapshot or have it fired by timecode. We did a little bit of live movement in Forest Hills. I think you can do almost anything. I mean, you can have a device. It's basically like playing a video game. You have a device that grabs, you just select the object that you want to move, and then you can just move it. For that matter, you could have a touch screen and you could move it on a touch screen and it would do the same thing. I don't have any content like this, but I would like to take something and just spin it around. The surround thing is kind of a different thing. Not everybody would benefit or be able to do a surround show. It's difficult. You have to find the content. It tends to work with Alt-J because of what is in their music, but for any artist, the L-ISA Focus system, I think any music would benefit from it. For instance, even tonight at this show, the support band is just a very small three-piece with not very much instrumentation. It still benefits from the system because you can place every one of those instruments exactly where you want them. It's mostly your ears doing the mixing with L-ISA instead of the speakers trying to reproduce a mix that you've put together. You're allowing a much more natural and organic type of mixing to happen. You're experiencing it in a much more similar way to the way you really experience music when you hear someone playing an acoustic guitar or drums just on their own, not amplified, not with the sound system. It's much more like that. It's very organic in that way. I hate that organic seems like a silly word to use, but it's just natural. It is definitely hyper real. It's amplified, it's processed, but the end result is more realistic than a conventional stereo PA system, I'd say. That's a good way to describe it, I think.
I love the S6L. It has an easy workflow. The layout is really easy to customize. It sounds great. For L-ISA,
what you need is a MADI stream. I'm using the Avid because I built the mixes for our usual show on an Avid. I didn't want to do everything again. The connectivity between the Avid and the L-ISA processor with a BNC it's only 32 channels. With other desks, if you're using optical MADI, the L-ISA will accept 64 channels. I was able to do it in 32, so I stayed with the Avid. From there, it goes out to a distribution network to get to the speakers.
We take the BNC coax from the Avid into the L-ISA processor, and then we actually, do we go to the RME first?
No, it goes into.
No, it goes.
Sorry.
So basically, we go out of the Avid optical into an RME MADI converter, which converts it to MADI optical.
Yeah.
Did I just say that?
No, it goes BNC out of the Avid. Okay.
So we take it out of the Avid BNC coax into the RME. No.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, that's what we're doing. Okay, I'll start again.
So we take it out of the Avid BNC coax into an RME, which converts it to MADI optical. And then that feeds the L-ISA processor. And then we take it out of the L-ISA processor, MADI optical again, into a Riedel RockNet system, which we have AES devices and analog devices on that RockNet network, so that we can provide AES audio to the amplifiers with a analog backup redundancy. So if the AES network falls over, we have an analog redundancy.
For instance, you could do direct outs of every channel. I don't see the need. I'm using 2 kick drum mics and 2 snare drum mics. I don't see the need to send each one of those. So I put them into a little mix and send that out as one source. And there are some other things that I did a little bit more pre-mixing to keep my channels, to keep my sources down to 32 objects. Sometimes that's limiting, but I was able to make it work. It's less than 48 always.
42.
It's always been, yeah, I think it is 42. It's not too much to mix down to 32. You also have to remember, if you're using specific effects, delays, or your own special reverbs, you have to send those to the L-ISA as an object as well. So there's a little bit of that. I just have an effects bus. It's good enough. It's the Avid desk, Avid mic pre's. I'm using completely stock plugins that come with the desk. I'm not using any third-party plugins. I tend to try to get the sound right on the stage before it ever gets into the preamp, as opposed to lots of processing and specific things like that in the desk. Anytime you add a plugin, you add latency, things change. I think it's best if you keep it as pure as possible and just put faders up.